What have you noticed about Jesus since his resurrection on Easter Sunday? For me, it seems Jesus has become hypersensitive to gossip since his resurrection. It seems you cannot just talk about him behind his back without him showing up like, I can hear you. For example, on Easter Sunday, Mary Magdalene was with the angels. They were talking about Jesus. And all of a sudden, Jesus showed up. I can hear you. Last Sunday, the other disciples were together and they were talking to Thomas about Jesus. And all of a sudden, Jesus appeared. I can hear you. And today, two of the disciples were on their way from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And they were talking about Jesus. Once again, Jesus appeared. I can hear you. But why were the disciples unable to recognize Jesus in each of the cases where he arrived, where he appeared to them? In each case Jesus showed up, it took them time to recognize him. Why? While that is a very important question, our concern now is, Jesus said, I will be with you until the end of time. He's still with us. But are we able to recognize Jesus? In the story of the disciples on the way to Emmaus, in today's gospel passage, one of them goes by the name Cleopas. Do you know the name of the second disciple? Okay, since I'm not getting answers from you, I can now confidently tell you that the name of the second disciple is Emmanuel Ochigbo. You doubt me? Well, the gospel passage does not tell us the name of the second disciple. That has given us the room to insert our own names. And so for me, the name of the second disciple is Emmanuel Ochigbo. You can insert your own name there. And the point here is that when we read this story, when we listen to this story, we are not to experience this story as spectators. Each of us is called to be an active participant in what is going on in today's gospel passage. It is about how we have been unable to recognize Jesus. The story also reveals to us three important places where Jesus shows himself to us. Three important areas where Jesus reveals himself to us. One, in the broken brother or sister. Two, in the broken word. Three, in the broken bread. There's something common to the three of them: brokenness. Broken brother or sister, broken word, and broken bread. The first one, the broken brother or sister. Jesus reveals himself in today's gospel passage as a broken brother, as a lonely traveler, as an ignorant stranger. At the time of creation, the book of Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 reveals to us that God says, let us make human beings in our image and likeness. And in Matthew chapter 25, towards the end of the public ministry of Jesus, Jesus talks about the final judgment, and here he gives the marking scheme. What will God be looking out for? What are the points in our lives? What is the criteria that God will use to judge us at the end of our sojourn here on earth? And here Jesus says, when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. And so, the disciples, in an attempt to welcome a broken brother, to welcome a stranger, they ended up entertaining the risen Lord. But did you hear what they said at the beginning of the conversation with Jesus? They asked him, are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who does not know of the things that have taken place there in these days? Does that remind you of anyone in your life? For me, it reminds me of some classmates or some co-workers who will not answer your question except they have talked down on you. Such classmates, such co-workers, you go to them, you ask them a simple question, and instead of going straight to the answer, they will first express their disappointment. They will first express their surprise. And why is it that at your level, you are still asking this kind of question? You know what? It takes courage. It takes humility. It takes effort for someone to come to you to ask a question. There is no point complicating their situations. If you know the answer, if you want to render them help, go straight to the point. There is no need belittling them before offering them help. There is no need making them to feel less human before you come to their aid, for that will water down your charity. The fact that you are better than someone today in a particular aspect does not mean that you may not need their help tomorrow. Now, the disciples saw themselves as the experts who were out to help the ignoramus. Unknown to them that not only did Jesus know the answer, but that Jesus is the answer. 2, Jesus reveals himself in the broken word. So beginning from Moses to the prophets, Jesus explained to them things concerning himself. And so when we gather at Mass, the liturgy of the Word, where we read from the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then to the point of the homily, there Jesus reveals himself to us. When devoutly, on our own, we sit down to read the Bible, there again Jesus reveals himself to us. When we gather as members of the same small Christian community or small church communities, there again Jesus reveals himself to us. 3, in the broken bread. The story goes this way. But he took the bread, he said the blessing, he broke it, he gave it to them, and they recognized him. And so when we gather at Mass, in the liturgy of the Holy Eucharist, there Jesus reveals himself to us as he really is, his body, his blood, his soul, and his divinity under the appearances of bread and wine. Regarding this, in the Tantum Ergo, Thomas Aquinas would sing, "Faith will tell us Christ is present when our human senses fail." One other important detail about the story here is, after Jesus gave them the bread, he vanished from their sight. Why did that happen? Jesus vanished because when they consumed Jesus, there was no need for Jesus to be outside of them. For Jesus at that point was no longer with them, but in them. And so when we receive Jesus Christ in the Holy Eucharist, we, each and every one of us, becomes Christ. For that has been the longing of Jesus right from time. You remember in his high priestly prayer, in the Gospel according to John chapter 17, there earnestly he prayed to his Father, "Father, that they may be one with me just like I am with you, that we all may be one." That is the longing of Jesus, which finds fulfillment in the reception of the Holy Eucharist. We receive Christ, we become Christ. And so if each and every one of us becomes Christ, it means when I love you, I am loving Christ. When I hate you, I am hating Christ. For we are all Christ. The story of the disciples on the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus also tells the story of the celebration of the Holy Mass, of the Holy Eucharist. Let us take them one after the other. The story begins with the two disciples, and later on, Jesus joins them. That reminds us of the beginning of the Mass, where we gather as a congregation, and then the priest, who acts in the person of Christ the head, comes in procession and joins us, just like Jesus joins the two disciples on the way to Emmaus. And then after that, Jesus asked the disciples, "What are you talking about?" And then they had to bring him on the same page with them by telling him what the conversation was all about. That reminds us of part of the introductory rite where the priest introduces the Mass. Today, we celebrate the feast of, or today is the third Sunday of Easter. So the priest brings all of us to the same page so that we know what we are celebrating today. And afterwards, Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are! How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke." That is the penitential rites. At that point where the priest says, to prepare ourselves for this Mass, let us call to mind our foolishness. Let us call to mind the various times that we have been slow to believe. Let us call to mind the various times we have sinned and ask for God's pardon and strength. And after that, as Jesus opens to them, beginning from Moses to the prophets, revealing everything about himself in the scriptures. And that brings us to the liturgy of the word, the readings to the point of the homily. And after that, Jesus took the bread, he said the blessing, he broke the bread and gave it to them. And that is the liturgy of the Holy Eucharist. The story ends by saying that, so the disciples set out immediately and went back. They returned to Jerusalem. The same Jerusalem they were running away from. Having encountered the Lord, they were running back in haste to the same Jerusalem. That brings us to the dismissal rite. The point where the deacon or the priest says, "Go and proclaim the gospel of the Lord." this is not the end of the Mass. The dismissal rite does not end the Mass. Rather, the dismissal rite is the beginning of another important part of the Mass, where we are challenged to go and share what we have experienced at Mass, where we are challenged to go and tell the world that He is risen by the way we live our lives, to tell the world that He is alive by the way we live our lives. At that time of the Mass, the priest or the deacon is reminding us that we have been given to give. We have been blessed to bless. For it is not enough to count our blessings. We should also share our blessings.